A small-town police station in the deep south. A black woman walks in with a calm, confident stride. She doesn't flinch, doesn't ask permission, and definitely doesn't back down. Something about her throws everyone off because she's not like anyone they've ever seen. And when a racist cop tries to stop her and lays a hand on her, he has no idea. He's just made the biggest mistake of his life. She's not just any woman, and what happens next will shake this town to its core. This is a story about power, corruption, and cold, unforgiving justice. Trust me, you won't see the ending coming. Before we dive in, tell us what time you're listening and where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The rain had stopped an hour ago, but the streets of Faircross still glistened under the hazy orange of the setting sun. A damp chill lingered in the air, the kind that clung to your clothes and made everything feel just a little heavier. The courthouse sat perched on a hill like an old sentinel, flanked by rows of uneven brick buildings and weary storefronts that had long since given up trying to look modern. A tattered American flag flapped lazily on a pole in front of the police precinct, the wind catching it just enough to make it snap, once sharp, brief, like a warning. Vanessa Cole stepped out of her car and onto the cracked pavement, heels clicking with quiet defiance against the sidewalk. She stood still for a moment, taking in the view. To someone else, this might have looked like a sleepy southern town, a little behind the times but harmless. Vanessa knew better. Places like this didn't need to be loud to be dangerous. They were built on the quiet things, looks, whispers, paperwork that disappeared when no one was watching. She adjusted the collar of her slate gray trench coat and crossed the street, a leather folder tucked under one arm and her other hand slipping casually into her pocket. Her black blazer was perfectly tailored, her posture upright, and her walk steady. Everything about her said she belonged, even if the people in this town would never admit it. Inside the precinct, the fluorescent lights hummed low and cold. The walls were lined with faded posters about crime prevention and recruitment. The floor was scuffed, the paint chipped in places, and the smell of stale coffee and fried food hung heavy in the air. It wasn't messy, exactly, but it wasn't welcoming either. Like the kind of place where everything had a thin layer of dust no one ever noticed until someone new walked in. And Vanessa was definitely someone new. Heads turned the second she entered. A conversation at the front desk died mid-sentence. Phones kept ringing, but nobody answered them. She felt the heat of a dozen stares following her as she walked past worn-down desks and bulletin boards plastered with memos from 3 years ago. No one said anything, not yet, but the message was clear. You don't belong here. She didn't flinch. She'd been walking into rooms like this for 20 years. Vanessa scanned the room, noting faces, uniforms, badges. Most of the officers looked young, too young to be so hardened. The older ones just looked tired. A few of them exchanged glances, tight-lipped and tense, as if they already sensed why she was here but didn't dare say it aloud. She recognized that look. She'd seen it in courtrooms and boardrooms, in the silence between sentences. It wasn't curiosity. It was suspicion. It was resentment. It was the question hanging unspoken in the air. What does someone like her think she's doing here? But Vanessa didn't break stride. She walked like the hallway belonged to her, like every step was preordained. She could feel the weight of the badge tucked inside her coat. Not that she needed to show it. Not yet. When she reached the end of the hall, a young clerk in a wrinkled uniform started to speak but trailed off, his eyes darting nervously to something or someone behind her. She didn't turn around. She already knew the kind of presence that made people shift like that. Authority, sure, but the wrong kind. Vanessa paused for just a moment, enough to look the clerk in the eye. "I'm here to access the personnel records," she said calmly, her voice low but firm. "There should have been a request submitted this morning." The clerk nodded, fumbling with the keyboard, clearly unsure of whether to comply or stall. Vanessa didn't wait for confirmation. She could already feel the tension in the room thickening like fog. The walls weren't closing in exactly, but the air had changed. Denser, colder, like something was watching. Outside the building, a pickup truck with rusted doors and a Confederate flag decal on the bumper rolled slowly by. Vanessa didn't even glance toward it. She hadn't come to this town to make friends. She was here for answers, and she intended to get them. Vanessa had barely taken a step toward the records room when the sharp sound of boots on tile cut through the low hum of the precinct. It was a different kind of step, heavy, intentional, the kind that wanted to be heard. She didn't have to look to know someone was moving toward her with purpose. But she turned anyway, calm, measured, and unafraid. Standing in the hallway was a broad-shouldered white man in his late 30s. His hair was cut short, military style, and his uniform was pressed with almost obsessive precision. His badge glinted under the harsh fluorescent light, but it was the look in his eyes that caught Vanessa's attention, first narrowed, assessing, and full of something darker than curiosity. She knew that look. She'd seen it before, too many times to count. Clint Mercer. The name had come up in briefings, but only in passing. A career deputy, several commendations, and a reputation for being old school, which Vanessa had long since learned was usually a polite way of saying problematic. His file was thin, but his presence was loud. He gave off the energy of someone who thought every room belonged to him and wasn't used to being told otherwise. "You lost?" he asked, his voice thick with that southern edge, somewhere between sarcasm and accusation. Vanessa didn't blink. "I'm right where I need to be." Clint took a few steps closer, arms crossed over his chest. "This area's restricted." "You got clearance for this?" She held his gaze. "I do." He looked her up and down slowly, his smirk widening. "That right? Funny, don't see many folks walking in here like they own the place, especially not in a pantsuit." Vanessa didn't rise to the bait. "Is there a reason you're blocking my path, deputy?" He didn't move. "There's a process around here. People don't just walk in off the street and go poking through files." "I'm not just anyone off the street," she said, voice steady, "and I'm not poking." He leaned in slightly, his smile losing all pretense of humor. "You got a badge, sweetheart? Or just a whole lot of attitude?" She could feel the heat rising in the room, not from her, but from him. This wasn't about protocol. It wasn't about clearance or rules. This was about power. He didn't like the way she walked in with authority. He didn't like the way she stood her ground. And more than anything, he didn't like the fact that she was a black woman who didn't flinch when he got in her face. Vanessa slowly reached into her coat, her fingers brushing against the leather of her badge holder. But before she pulled it out, she paused long enough for the silence to stretch thin. "You don't want to do this," she said quietly. Clint's jaw tightened. "Do what?" She took a half step forward, closing the space between them. "Make a mistake you can't take back." He laughed, a single sharp burst that echoed off the walls. "You threatening me now?" "No," she said. "I'm warning you." The hallway was still. Behind Clint, a young officer poked his head out of a nearby office, then quickly disappeared, pretending not to have seen anything. A phone rang down the corridor, but went unanswered. The entire building seemed to be holding its breath. Clint's hand flexed slightly at his side, hovering near his belt, not on his weapon, but close enough to send a message. "You got a lot of nerve," he muttered. Vanessa tilted her head. "And you've got a lot to lose." He stared at her, trying to gauge whether she was bluffing. But she wasn't. She never bluffed. She didn't have to. A flicker of uncertainty passed across his face, but it didn't last. He stepped even closer, now well within arm's reach, and lowered his voice to a near growl. "This is my precinct, my town. You don't get to walk in here and act like you run the place." Vanessa's expression didn't change. "I don't need to act. I do run the place, at least when it comes to the investigation I'm leading." That did it. Clint's smirk vanished, replaced by something colder, meaner. He was about to speak again, but the door to the main records room opened just then. and a young woman in a dispatcher's uniform poked her head out. "Chief?" she asked, her voice hesitant. "We have those files you requested." Clint turned sharply toward the voice. "Who told you to speak?" The young woman flinched and ducked back inside. Vanessa stepped past him without another word, brushing his shoulder as she did. Not hard, not enough to provoke, just enough to let him know she wasn't scared, and that was what really set him off. "You think this is over?" he snapped behind her. She paused at the threshold of the records room, half turning to look at him. "No," she said calmly. "I think it's just beginning." Then she disappeared into the room, leaving Clint standing alone in the hallway, his fists clenched and his pride bruised. And, for the first time in a long time, someone in that building made him feel small. The room was quiet now, almost too quiet. Vanessa stood inside the records room, the dull fluorescent light flickering overhead, casting faint shadows on rows of metal filing cabinets. The dispatcher who had called her chief just minutes ago was gone, having hurried out with nervous glances in both directions. Vanessa could still feel Clint's presence outside, like a foul smell that clung to the walls. She took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, steadying herself. It wasn't the first time a man like him had tried to throw his weight around, and it wouldn't be the last. But something about Clint Mercer was different. Not smarter, not stronger, but more dangerous. Not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't. He wasn't posturing to impress anyone. He was used to getting away with it. Vanessa placed her leather folder on the edge of a dented metal desk and flipped it open, pulling out the internal affairs document that listed the records she had been sent to retrieve. A thin paper trail, suspiciously short, all pointing back to Mercer. There were whispers of misconduct, unjustified stops, use of force, excessive intimidation, but nothing stuck. Every incident report had either been redacted, rewritten, or mysteriously disappeared. She reached for one of the filing cabinet drawers and pulled it open, the metal screeching loudly. The folder she needed wasn't where it should have been. She tried another drawer, then another. Nothing. Her brow furrowed. Even in a precinct this rundown, the records weren't supposed to be this disorganized. She didn't hear him coming. The door slammed open behind her, banging hard against the wall. Vanessa spun around. Clint Mercer was back, and this time he wasn't just angry. He was seething. "You think you can just walk in here and embarrass me in front of my people?" He spat, taking a step into the room. Vanessa didn't move. "This isn't about embarrassment, it's about accountability." Clint let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "You think you've got power here? Lady, this is my house." "No," Vanessa said coolly. "This is a government building. You don't own it. You just work here." His smirk twisted into something uglier. "You got a smart mouth." "And you've got a short fuse," she replied, folding her arms. Not a great combination for someone wearing a badge. That did it. Without warning, Clint's hand lashed out, grabbing her by the arm and yanking her away from the file drawer. She stumbled back against the desk, but caught herself quickly. Her heart pounded, but she stayed composed. "Take your hands off me," she said, her voice low and commanding. He didn't. Instead, he leaned in close, the smell of coffee and tobacco on his breath. "You think a fancy title and some paperwork makes you untouchable?" Vanessa didn't flinch. "I think putting your hands on me just became the worst mistake of your career." Clint's eyes burned, and for a moment, there was something terrifying in the way he looked at her, like he wasn't seeing a person at all, just a challenge. And then his fist moved. It happened fast. Too fast. A burst of pain shot through Vanessa's jaw as her head snapped to the side. She hit the edge of the desk with her hip and staggered. Blood filled her mouth instantly, warm and metallic, and the world spun for half a second. She caught herself on the desk, one hand flat against the cold metal, the other raised defensively. Her breath came short. Her jaw throbbed. But she didn't fall. She refused to fall. Across from her, Clint stood with his chest heaving, his hand still clenched. There was no regret in his eyes, only satisfaction. "Didn't think I'd actually do it, did you?" he said, almost proudly. Vanessa wiped the blood from her lip with the back of her hand. "You just committed felony assault on a federal officer," she said calmly, the words clear and precise, despite the swelling in her face. "And you did it in front of a surveillance camera." Clint's eyes darted to the corner of the ceiling where, sure enough, a small red light blinked silently in the corner of the room. And now, his confidence began to crack. "Camera's been broken for months," he muttered. Vanessa didn't look away from him. "You sure about that?" A flicker of doubt passed over his face. She straightened her back, standing tall despite the pain. "You think I walked in here alone? You think no one's watching?" He hesitated. For the first time, his hands shook slightly at his sides. Then came the voice from behind him. "Sir, is everything all right in here?" Both turned. A young officer stood in the doorway, holding a tablet and looking between the two of them. His eyes landed on Vanessa's face, on the blood at the corner of her mouth, the slight bruise already forming on her cheek. His expression shifted immediately. "Chief Cole?" the officer said, startled. "Do you need medical attention?" Clint stepped back, stammering. "This isn't what it looks like." Vanessa raised a hand, silencing him. "I'm fine," she said to the officer, though her voice carried steel now. "But I'll need a copy of that camera feed, and I want Officer Mercer placed on administrative leave. Immediately." The young man blinked, wide-eyed. "Yes, ma'am." Clint's voice cracked. "You can't do this." Vanessa turned back to him, her gaze unwavering. "You don't know who I am, do you?" He said nothing. "I'm not just an agent," she continued. "I'm your superior officer, and I've got a federal investigation to run starting with you." The silence that followed was deafening. Clint stood frozen in the center of the room, rage draining into disbelief. Vanessa turned toward the younger officer. "Escort him out. I'll be filing charges." The officer nodded, moving quickly. As Clint was led out of the room, his eyes met hers one last time, but there was no threat in them now, only fear. Vanessa stood alone in the records room, her breath steadying as the door clicked shut behind Clint. The silence felt different now, thicker, charged. Her jaw ached, and the taste of blood still lingered, but she was upright, in control, and far from done. She moved toward the desk and pulled out a chair, sitting down slowly, deliberately. Every muscle in her body was wound tight, but her mind was clearer than it had been all evening. The adrenaline wasn't clouding her, it was sharpening her. Clint had made his move. Now, it was her turn. From her coat pocket, she pulled out her badge, flipping it open and laying it flat on the desk in front of her. It wasn't about proving anything to herself. She knew who she was. But in this moment, surrounded by hostility and doubt, it was a reminder of what she carried and why she was here. She reached into her folder and pulled out a pen, then opened her notebook and began writing everything. The date, the time, the precise details of Clint's assault, his behavior, his words. Every officer knew the first thing you do after an incident is document it. It wasn't just evidence. It was protection. Her hand moved steadily across the page until the door opened again. She didn't look up immediately. "MAAM?" a voice asked cautiously. She glanced up to find the young officer from earlier barely out of his 20s, uniform too stiff, eyes too wide. He was holding a tablet in both hands, like it might break if he loosened his grip. "I've pulled the camera feed from the last 30 minutes, he said, voice low. It's all there." Vanessa nodded. "What's your name?" "Eric, ma'am." "Officer Eric Jennings." She studied him for a beat, searching his face for any sign of sarcasm or skepticism. Instead, she saw uncertainty, but something else, too. Concern. "Eric," she said, "did you see what happened?" He hesitated. "Only the end, ma'am. I walked in when you were bleeding." Vanessa didn't press. "That's enough. I'll need that video downloaded and backed up to a secure drive, and keep a copy off-site. I don't want it getting lost in the system." He nodded quickly. "Understood." She leaned forward. "Eric, you've been here a while?" "Almost 3 years. And Officer Mercer has this happen before?" Eric shifted, his fingers tightening on the tablet. "Not." Like that. I mean nothing that anyone ever reported. But, his voice trailed off. But, there've been stories, he said. Incidents. Nothing concrete. People talk, but nobody writes it down, because it doesn't matter. Or at least it didn't. Vanessa nodded slowly. That was the problem in places like this. Abuse didn't always show up in the paperwork. It lived in silences, in rumors, in the spaces between what was said and what was understood. And if no one challenged it, it became the rule. She stood, every inch of her tall frame straightening with quiet purpose. "Come with me," she said. Eric blinked. "Where are we going? To make it matter." Vanessa led him back into the hallway, where the air was even more tense than before. Officers stared from behind desks and doorways. Conversations stopped the second she walked by. She could feel the questions forming on their lips. What happened? What did she do? But no one said them out loud. They passed Clint's empty desk, his nameplate still sitting there like he'd just stepped away for coffee. Eric glanced at it, then quickly looked away. Vanessa stopped outside the precinct commander's office. She knocked once and pushed the door open without waiting for permission. Inside, a middle-aged white man with salt and pepper hair looked up from his computer. Commander David Lang. His record was clean, but she didn't trust records anymore. "Chief Cole," he said, standing halfway, "we weren't expecting you until—" "I'm not here on a courtesy visit," Vanessa said sharply. "One of your deputies assaulted a federal officer tonight. I want him processed and placed in holding until further instructions from the Bureau." Lang blinked, caught off guard. "Who?" "Clint Mercer," she said. Lang's brow furrowed. What exactly happened? Eric stepped forward, holding out the tablet. "It's on the camera footage, sir." Lang took it reluctantly, his fingers hesitant as he began watching. The first few seconds were quiet. Then Vanessa saw it in his face the exact moment Clint struck her. Lang's expression shifted from skeptical to stunned, then cautious. "Well," he said after a long pause, "this is serious." "Yes," Vanessa replied. "It is." Lang set the tablet down and looked at her. "And what do you want from me?" "I want full cooperation," she said. "Access to personnel files, disciplinary reports, internal memos. I'm here on an official Bureau investigation, and this incident just gave me probable cause to dig deeper." Lang's jaw worked silently for a moment. He wasn't ready for this. No one ever was. "Of course," he said finally. "You'll have everything you need." Vanessa gave a single nod. "Good. Because I plan to clean house." Lang didn't argue. He just looked tired. She turned back to Eric. "Get the footage secured, then meet me in interview room 2. Eric nodded and left, leaving Vanessa standing alone in the office. Lang cleared his throat. "You do realize this could cause complications." Vanessa's eyes narrowed. Only for the people who let this kind of behavior fester. He didn't respond. She left without another word. Back in the hallway, the whispers had grown louder, but Vanessa didn't care. Her lip was still bleeding, her face ached, and her nerves buzzed with adrenaline, but she was right where she needed to be. She wasn't here to play nice. She wasn't here to make friends. She was here to burn the rot out from the inside. And Clint Mercer had just handed her the match. Vanessa closed the door to interview room 2 behind her and let the silence settle like a blanket over the steel table and concrete walls. The hum of the overhead light was faint, almost meditative. She sat down slowly, her jaw still sore, a dull ache that pulsed with every breath. She didn't mind it. Pain, in this case, was useful. It reminded her what was at stake. She laid her badge on the table, front and center. Not for anyone else's benefit this time she was alone, but to center herself. Sometimes, in places like this, it helped to put your purpose out in the open. In rooms built to make you small, you had to take up space on purpose. The door creaked open. Eric stepped in, his eyes flicking nervously to her face, then back down to the folder he held. "He's in the holding room," Eric said. The captain called in a supervisor from county. Someone neutral. "Just in case." "Good," Vanessa replied. "I don't want anyone connected to this precinct touching him. Not until this investigation is fully underway." Eric nodded but didn't move to sit. He hovered, uncertain. "Chief, is it okay if I ask something?" Vanessa gestured to the chair across from her. "Go ahead." He sat, fidgeting with the edge of the folder. "Why'd you come here? This town? You could have picked anywhere. Why this place?" Vanessa leaned back in her chair, exhaling softly. "Because the complaints stopped here." Eric looked confused. "There were patterns," she said. "Reports from neighboring counties, complaints about false arrests, excessive force, people going missing after minor infractions. We traced a lot of it back to this area. But whenever it got close to Faircross, the paper trail just ended. It was like someone turned off the faucet." Eric swallowed. "So you knew something was going on." "I suspected. Now I know." He looked down at his hands, then quietly said, "This place, it hasn't been right for a long time." Vanessa tilted her head. "Then why are you still here?" "I thought maybe I could be one of the good ones," he said. "Do the job right. Make a difference. But after a while, it's hard to tell if you're helping or just surviving." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "That's going to change. You're part of that now if you're ready for it." Eric nodded, his expression firming. "I am." Before she could respond, the door swung open again. This time, it wasn't hesitation that stepped in, it was arrogance. Clint Mercer was flanked by 2 officers from county. His hands were cuffed in front of him, but he stood with his chest out, chin raised, as if the restraints were just a formality. His lip curled into a smirk the second he saw Vanessa. "Really?" he said. "An interrogation? You planning to beat a confession out of me next?" Vanessa didn't rise. "Have a seat, Officer Mercer." One of the county officers gave Clint a nudge toward the chair, and he sank into it with exaggerated disdain. "You don't get to call me officer anymore," he said. "You had me dragged out of here like some criminal." "You are a criminal," she said evenly. "You assaulted a federal agent in a secure facility. That alone could earn you 10 years. Clint scoffed. "Come on." It was a scuffle. No one's going to do real time over that. Vanessa folded her arms. "You sure about that?" He shifted just slightly. "You think you're going to bring this whole department down, based on a little blood and bruising?" "No," she said. "I'm going to bring it down based on the records I'm about to uncover, the complaints that were buried, and the evidence you and others tried to erase." Clint's jaw clenched. "You're wasting your time." Vanessa leaned forward, eyes locked on his. "Tell me something, Mercer, why were the files missing from the cabinet?" He blinked. Just once. Then the smirk returned. "No idea what you're talking about." "Of course not." She slid a small recorder across the table and hit record. "This is for the Bureau. You're going to sit here and listen. You don't have to speak, but you'll hear every word." Clint opened his mouth, but she didn't give him the chance. "You assaulted me," she said, "on camera, in a government building, and as of this moment, you are no longer just the subject of an internal inquiry. You are the trigger to a federal investigation into systemic corruption, obstruction of justice, and a potential cover-up that stretches across this department and into others." Clint's face paled slightly, but he masked it with a half-laugh. "You think you're some kind of hero?" "No," she said. "I'm the consequence." The room fell silent. Eric sat still, his hand frozen over his notepad. Finally, Clint looked at her. Really looked like he was trying to calculate just how much she already knew. "You don't know what you're walking into," he said, voice lower now. "There's more to this town than you think. More people involved." "Then I'll find them," Vanessa said. "Starting with you." He leaned back in his chair, lips tight, eyes unreadable. "You're going to regret this," he said finally. "They're not going to let you win." Vanessa reached for the recorder and stopped it. "They already lost," she said, "the second you threw that punch." As the officers led Clint out of the room, he glanced back over his shoulder, but this time, there was no smugness in his face. Only fear. Vanessa sat back and exhaled. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone in the building could feel it. Vanessa didn't leave the precinct that night. She could have. After filing charges, after getting Clint processed and locked into a holding cell under County's watch, she could have driven back to her hotel, iced her jaw, and waited for the paperwork to catch up. But that wasn't her style. She knew momentum like this didn't come often. Once you cracked something open, you had to keep digging before the rot figured out how to cover itself up again. It was close to midnight when she returned to the records room, a steaming cup of burnt precinct coffee in one hand and her laptop in the other. The place was quieter now. Officers had either gone home or retreated into their offices, watching her with a mix of suspicion and caution. No one dared confront her, not after Clint. But silence didn't mean safety. Eric was already there when she walked in, seated at the desk, a stack of old personnel files beside him, and his face pale in the glow of the screen. "Find anything?" Vanessa asked as she sat across from him. Eric looked up slowly, like he hadn't realized how late it had gotten. "Too much," he said. "I pulled disciplinary records, shift reports, booking logs, going back 5 years. You were right. Everything trails off around here, but I think that's because it was all being rewritten." Vanessa leaned in. "How? Look at this." He slid a file over. "Officer arrests an unarmed man, record says suspect resisted." But when you match it against the jail logs and body cam timestamps, there's no entry, no footage. "Which means it never happened," she said. "Or it did, and someone deleted it." Vanessa flipped through the folder. The paper felt old, yellowed at the edges, like it had been sitting in a drawer untouched for years. But someone had touched it, she could tell. The same pen, same handwriting, identical phrases recycled across different cases. She looked at Eric. "This is a pattern. How far back does it go?" "Farther than I thought." He opened a spreadsheet on his laptop and turned it toward her. Names, dates, badge numbers, and incident summaries filled the screen. But several names appeared again and again, Clint Mercer being one of them. Another was even more familiar. "Sheriff John Dillard," Vanessa muttered. Eric nodded. "I've pulled at least 20 reports, with his signature on them, either clearing officers of wrongdoing or marking incidents as inconclusive, before internal review ever happened." Vanessa sat back, her mind racing. Dillard. The man who hadn't so much as spoken to her since her arrival. He wasn't just aware of what was happening, he was the one signing off on it. "Any complaints filed against him?" Eric hesitated. "Yes, but they're sanitized. And the ones from civilians? They never made it past intake. Meaning, someone filtered them out." Eric nodded. "Or buried them." Vanessa stared at the spreadsheet for a long moment, then opened her laptop and pulled up her bureau case notes. She began cross-referencing names, officers, victims, arrests gone wrong. The same threads kept appearing, patterns of excessive force, missing footage, uncooperative suspects who never gave statements because they'd never been booked properly in the first place. "They're protecting each other," she said. "It's not just misconduct, it's systemic obstruction." She clicked through more entries. An entire ecosystem of corruption, carefully managed and quietly maintained. The kind of machine that couldn't function without cooperation from every level. "How many officers are involved?" she asked. "At least a dozen. Probably more," Eric said. "And I think there's money involved too." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "Bribes? Maybe. Or kickbacks. I found a bunch of invoices for equipment upgrades and training programs that don't line up with anything we actually received." He slid a few more folders across the table. Purchases signed off by Dillard for gear that never arrived, contractors that didn't exist, payments that went out with no receipts. Vanessa felt a slow, cold knot tightening in her chest. "Fraud," she murmured, "and likely embezzlement." Eric nodded grimly. "It's worse than we thought." Vanessa took a sip of the awful coffee, wincing slightly. Her jaw still ached, but the pain kept her grounded. She opened one of the older personnel files. An officer named Marcus Tate, 15 years on the force. Never promoted, but never disciplined either. His name showed up a lot in the reports, always nearby, always on shift, always signing off on the final entries. She pointed to the file. "What about him?" Eric looked over. Tate? He's quiet, keeps to himself. People say he just wants to retire and disappear, never causes trouble, which means he sees everything and says nothing. Vanessa closed the file and stood. Get him in here, quietly. Eric hesitated. Tonight? Tonight, she said, before someone tips him off or spooks him into silence. He nodded and left the room. Vanessa remained, staring at the wall across from her, the overhead lights buzzing faintly. It always started like this: one officer too loud, one punch too far, and suddenly the whole web unraveled. She had seen it before, but this felt bigger, dirtier. By the time Eric returned, Marcus Tate was trailing behind him, eyes low, shoulders hunched. The man looked exhausted. His uniform was worn at the cuffs, his hands calloused and fidgety. He looked like someone who had given up a long time ago. Vanessa didn't speak until the door was closed. Officer Tate, she said, calm and clear. Take a seat. He obeyed without a word. You know why you're here? He glanced at Eric, then back at Vanessa. I have a guess. We've been reviewing reports. A lot of reports. Your name shows up more than anyone else's. I've been here longer than most, he replied, voice even. That's not a crime. No, it's not. But silence can be, she said, especially when it means letting innocent people get hurt. He didn't respond, but his hands tightened slightly around the edges of the table. Vanessa leaned in. This is your chance to come clean, not to save your job. That ship sailed. But to do the right thing while you still can. Tate finally looked up, eyes bloodshot but sharp. And what happens if I do? What happens to my family when the rest of them find out I talked? You'll be protected, she said. But you have to help us first. There was a long pause, a beat of silence heavy enough to bend the air. Then Tate exhaled, slow and shaky. What do you want to know? He asked. Vanessa sat back, a small, quiet nod of acknowledgement. She didn't smile, not yet, but something had cracked, and it was just enough to let the light in. Marcus Tate sat in the dimly lit back office like a man unraveling. The tension in his body had shifted, not gone, but different now. His shoulders sagged more from guilt than fear, and his hands, which had trembled when he first sat down, were now still, clenched into loose fists in his lap. Vanessa could see it in his eyes. He wasn't just scared, he was tired. Tired of hiding, of knowing, of playing along with a system that had long since rotted. Eric stood quietly by the door, a silent witness. Vanessa sat across from Tate with her notebook open, pen resting between her fingers, though she hadn't written a word yet. She knew what this moment was. It wasn't about filling pages. It was about whether he'd finally find the courage to speak. I'm not a bad man, Tate said suddenly, his voice low and flat. I didn't set out to be part of this. I believe you, Vanessa replied, but you stayed silent while others got hurt. That makes you part of it, whether you like it or not. Tate nodded slowly. I know. Vanessa leaned forward. Then tell me what you know. He hesitated. Not because he didn't want to, but because saying it out loud made it real. After a long silence, he began. It started small, he said. Little things. Dillard pushing reports through without review. Officers roughing up suspects and writing it off as necessary force. At first, I thought it was just small-town crap. Ego, laziness, maybe incompetence. But then people started disappearing. Evidence went missing. Witnesses changed their stories or never made it to court. Vanessa scribbled quick notes. Who was involved? Tate rubbed his temples. Everyone. In one way or another. Clint, obviously. But also Jacobs, Rivera, even Lieutenant Nash. Some were deep in it, getting kickbacks, silencing complaints, even planting evidence. Others. Well, they just looked the other way, like I did. And Dillard? Vanessa asked. Tate let out a breath, almost a bitter laugh. He was the architect. He kept everything running smooth, controlled who got hired, who got promoted. He picked the weak ones, the ones who'd do whatever he said, either because they were scared or because they liked it. He made sure IA never got real complaints. And if someone pushed too hard, they disappeared, Vanessa said. Tate nodded grimly. Or were discredited, reassigned. One guy, Detective Larson, he started asking too many questions. Next thing I know, he's gone. Official story was family issues, but no one ever saw him pack up. One day, he was just gone. Vanessa felt the pit in her stomach tighten. How long has this been going on? Tate shook his head. Years. Maybe more than a decade. I stopped counting. Eric stepped forward now, his voice tight. Why didn't you come forward before? Tate looked up at him. Because I have a family, a wife, a daughter in college, and because I didn't think anyone would believe me. Around here, Dillard isn't just the law. He owns it. Vanessa's voice was soft but certain. Not anymore. She stood and walked to the window, the blinds closed, but still letting in slivers of the outside streetlights. The precinct was quiet, too quiet. She knew word had spread. Officers talked. Rumors multiplied. She could feel the entire building bracing for whatever came next. She turned back to Tate. Will you testify? He hesitated again, but less than before. If it means ending this, yes. Eric gave a small nod of approval. Vanessa could see the strain lifting slightly from his shoulders, too. We need records, documents, proof, she said. Do you have anything? Anything we can use to expose Dillard and connect the rest? Tate reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. He slid it across the table. I kept copies, just in case. Never told anyone, but I knew one day someone might actually come looking. Vanessa opened the envelope. Inside were memos, unsigned reports, and most importantly, copies of internal emails, all printed with timestamps and routing details. At the top of one chain, Sheriff Dillard's name was clear as day, approving the shredding of non-essential reports on an excessive force incident from 2 years ago. This was it. She looked at Eric. We have enough for a warrant. Eric blinked. You think the judge will sign off? I think we don't give them a choice, Vanessa said. We go straight to the district attorney. Tonight, we give them everything. She turned back to Tate. You're coming with us. You don't leave this building alone. Not until we know Dillard doesn't have someone waiting outside. Tate's eyes widened. You think he'll try to have me hurt? I think he's desperate, she said. And desperate men make mistakes. Eric moved toward the door. I'll call for transport. Secure car. We'll take him in under bureau protection. As he left, Vanessa leaned closer to Tate. You did the right thing, she said. He shook his head, almost whispering, I should have done it sooner. She didn't argue. There was no point in lecturing a man already drowning in guilt. But maybe, just maybe, doing something now could pull him out of it. Minutes later, they moved. Vanessa, Eric, and Tate exited through the rear of the precinct under cover of night, climbing into an unmarked bureau vehicle. The driver didn't speak, just nodded once before pulling away from the curb. The streets of Faircross were quiet, too quiet. Vanessa sat in the back, eyes scanning every corner, every alleyway. She didn't relax, not yet. She wouldn't, not until they were miles away from this building and closer to the courthouse. Tate stared out the window, silent. Eric checked his phone for updates from the bureau team prepping the warrant. Vanessa closed her eyes for just a moment, letting the darkness wash over her. It wasn't over, but the silence had finally broken, and now the system that thought it couldn't bleed was about to start hemorrhaging. The courthouse was still lit when Vanessa, Eric, and Tate arrived. It was after 1:00 a.m., but a few strategic phone calls had ensured that the right people were waiting. Assistant District Attorney Caroline Miles was already inside, a thin file in her hands, eyes sharp behind her glasses. She was younger than Vanessa expected, but carried herself with a kind of fire that made Vanessa immediately trust her instincts. This is everything? Caroline asked. Flipping through the documents Vanessa handed over, Vanessa nodded. More than enough for a preliminary warrant. You'll find financial records showing misuse of county funds, altered reports, suppressed complaints, and direct orders from Sheriff Dillard to bury excessive force claims. Caroline's eyes stopped on a name, Marcus Tate. Vanessa turned to where Tate stood in the corner of the office, trying not to look like he was shaking. He's cooperating. He brought copies. He's ready to testify. Caroline nodded once, then looked back down. Jesus, she murmured under her breath. This goes deep. It goes all the way to the top, Vanessa said. And I don't know how many people in this building or in that department are still protecting him. Caroline shut the file and stood. You'll have your warrant in 20 minutes. While she stepped away to speak to a clerk, Vanessa walked over to Tate. He was pale, hands twitching at his sides. You still with me? She asked. He nodded weakly. Yeah, just trying to remember how to breathe. Vanessa offered a small, steadying smile. You're doing fine. The silence between them was thick, not tense, but weighted. A man who'd kept his mouth shut for a decade was now risking everything, his job, his safety, his family, for the truth. And that carried a weight of its own. Caroline returned exactly 19 minutes later, handing Vanessa a signed warrant. You've got full authority to search Dillard's office, computer, private files, and any off-site storage he's authorized. And given what I just read, I've contacted the Bureau's State Field Division. They'll send agents to assist with the arrest, just to make sure there are no surprises. Vanessa took the warrant with a nod. Good. I want this clean. No one kicks down a door unless I say so. We're not here for theatrics. We're here for accountability. Eric pulled up in the unmarked car again at 2:15 a.m. This time, Vanessa sat in the front seat, holding the warrant in her hand like a loaded weapon. The precinct was a 5-minute drive away, but the air in the car felt like it was getting heavier by the second. Tate sat in the back, his knee bouncing, trying not to look out the window. You think he knows we're coming? Vanessa didn't take her eyes off the road. He will soon. The precinct parking lot was nearly empty when they arrived, but Vanessa knew better than to assume everyone inside was asleep. This place operated around the clock, even when the lights dimmed. They parked in the rear again, slipping through the employee entrance with the quiet ease of people who knew exactly what they were doing. Inside, the building felt different, stiller. Not the kind of still that came with peace, but the kind that came before a storm. Eric keyed into the second-floor hallway that led to Dillard's office. Vanessa led the way. The door to the sheriff's office was closed. Light leaked out from underneath. Vanessa knocked once. A beat. Then a voice, rough and slow. It's open. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. Sheriff John Dillard sat behind his desk, sleeves rolled up, tie undone, a glass of something brown in his hand. He didn't look surprised to see her. Well, he said, smiling faintly. I figured it was only a matter of time. Vanessa didn't smile. She stepped forward and laid the warrant on his desk. You're being placed under investigation for obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, abuse of authority, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Dillard raised his eyebrows. Big words. I'd ask if you have proof, but I know you do. Marcus finally talk? Vanessa didn't answer. She didn't need to. Dillard leaned back in his chair, swirling his drink. You know, Agent Cole, when you walked into this precinct, I thought, now, here's a woman who doesn't know how this game is played. But I underestimated you. You made a habit of doing that, she said. He laughed, slow and bitter. Maybe. But do you really think this ends with me? You think pulling a few threads will unravel the whole curtain? You're in deeper waters than you realize. Vanessa didn't flinch. I've got a life jacket, and a search team, and one hell of a flashlight. Dillard looked over her shoulder, saw Eric in the doorway, and smirked. You brought the Boy Scout too, Agent Jennings, she corrected. And he's the one who found most of your paper trail. Dillard drained the rest of his drink and stood. So what now? You gonna put me in cuffs? Parade me out the front door? Vanessa held up her phone. No parades, but I suggest you don't resist. There are 2 bureau agents waiting in the lobby and 3 more outside. You're not walking away from this. For a moment, Dillard said nothing. Then, slowly, He set his glass down and raised his hands. "I won't resist," he said, "but I will remember." Vanessa stepped aside as the two federal agents entered, read him his rights, and cuffed him. Dillard didn't speak again. He kept his chin high, face calm, but Vanessa could see it in his eyes. Panic. They led him past the bullpen, where a few officers had gathered, called in after hours by whispered texts and building tension. Some looked stunned, others looked relieved, and a few looked angry at her, angry at the disruption, angry that the lie they'd lived in was finally collapsing. Vanessa walked behind the agents, her face unreadable. Eric flanked her side. Tate remained outside, watching through the window, his expression unreadable. As Dillard disappeared down the hallway, Vanessa turned to Eric. "It's not over." "No," he agreed, "but it's starting." Back in the office, Vanessa sat down hard in the chair across from Dillard's desk. She stared at the leather blotter, the clean desk drawer labels, the polished nameplate that said Sheriff John Dillard. Then she reached forward and turned it around. No one sat there now, but that wouldn't last for long. Vanessa stared at the precinct from the outside, the glow of early morning turning the building into something quieter, almost peaceful. But she knew better. Peace didn't come this easy. Not after everything that had been uncovered in less than 48 hours. Inside, the station was in disarray. Not chaos, but a still, breath-holding kind of disruption. Officers whispered in corners. Some refused to make eye contact. Others, mostly the younger ones, looked cautiously hopeful. Vanessa knew what that look meant. They were waiting to see if this change was real, or if it would be buried like all the others. Eric sat at a desk just outside what had been Dillard's office. He was going through a stack of files, pulled from the sheriff's private cabinets. His face lined with exhaustion, but laser-focused. "They tried to wipe the drives," he said, flipping through a folder. "Last night, after we arrested him." Vanessa nodded. "Expected. Anything salvageable?" "Yeah," Eric said. "Tate helped us decrypt a backup folder on the internal server. I cross-referenced timestamps with the payment records we got from the clerk's office. There's over 100,000 in unauthorized funds over the last 2 years signed, approved, and processed by Dillard. Where did it go? To a handful of vendors that don't exist. Fake supply orders, dummy training programs. The money was rerouted sometimes to personal accounts, sometimes to shell LLCs. Some of it, I think, went right back to officers who played along." Vanessa blew out a quiet breath. "Kickbacks." Eric nodded grimly. She sat down across from him, rubbing her temples. The case had started with a punch, a violent, public, and ugly act of ego. But the deeper she went, the more that punch felt like a spark one that had landed in a powder keg of corruption. The door opened behind them, and Marcus Tate stepped in, holding a folder pressed against his chest, like it might shield him from the weight of what he was doing. "They know," he said quietly. "The ones still in the department. The ones who were part of it. They know I talked." Vanessa gestured for him to sit. "Has anyone said anything directly?" "No," he admitted. "But I can feel it. It's in the way they look at me, like I'm not supposed to be here anymore." Eric glanced over. "We'll protect you." Tate let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "You can't protect me from all of them. They've been running this place for years." Vanessa leaned forward. "Then we make sure none of them run anything again." She opened a manila envelope on the desk and spread out a fresh set of photos, surveillance stills, copies of falsified reports, and bank records. Every piece added another name to the growing list. "There's a press conference scheduled for this afternoon," she said. "We're making this public." Tate's eyes widened. "You're going to tell everyone?" "That's the only way this sticks," Vanessa said. "We do it in daylight, in front of cameras. We take the power away from the shadows they've been hiding in." Tate looked down at his hands. "What if they come after me anyway?" Vanessa reached across the desk, firm but calm. "Then they'll answer to me." He looked up at her, and for a moment she saw something different in his eyes. Not just fear, not even guilt. It was something close to hope. something he hadn't let himself feel in a long time. Later that afternoon, the courthouse steps were packed. Reporters, camera crews, community leaders, even a few curious civilians stood shoulder to shoulder as the microphones were tested and the podium adjusted. Vanessa stood behind the dais, her posture straight, her face composed. She wasn't a stranger to media attention, but this was different. This wasn't about politics or press optics. This was about breaking a cycle that had defined this town for far too long. Caroline Miles stepped to the mic first, speaking clearly, her voice echoing off the marble courthouse walls. As of this morning, Sheriff John Dillard has been formally charged with obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit fraud, and willful misconduct in public office. Our investigation has revealed a pattern of abuse that extends across years, implicating multiple individuals in the Faircross Police Department. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but Vanessa didn't react. She watched, measured. We would not have uncovered this without the efforts of federal agents, local whistleblowers, and officers who refused to stay silent, Caroline continued. This is not just about one man. This is about restoring faith in the system. Then she stepped back, and it was Vanessa's turn. She walked to the podium, her heels sharp on the stone. The crowd fell silent again. I didn't come here to make headlines, she began. I came here to find the truth. She paused, letting her words land. Faircross is not the first town I've investigated, and it won't be the last. But what happened here, what festered under the surface, wasn't just the result of a few bad actors. It was the product of a culture that valued silence over justice, loyalty over accountability. She looked out at the faces, some stunned, some nodding, some teary-eyed. That ends now. Applause broke out, not wild, but steady, like a collective release of breath people had been holding for years. As Vanessa stepped down, Eric joined her, slipping a piece of paper into her hand. We just got confirmation, he said. 3 more officers turned themselves in, said they want to cooperate. Vanessa nodded once. Keep them separated. We don't want their stories bleeding into each other. Tate was standing off to the side, far from the cameras, but when she passed him, he offered a short, grateful nod. You did it, he said. No, Vanessa corrected. We did it. But even as she walked away, even as the sun dipped behind the buildings and the crowd began to disperse, she knew it wasn't over, because taking down the head of the snake didn't guarantee the body wouldn't thrash. And some snakes had more than one head. The courthouse steps were empty now. Just hours earlier, they had been flooded with flashing cameras, voices raised in disbelief, cheers, and even some jeers from those who weren't ready to accept what had happened. But now, the only sound was the low hum of a street lamp and the occasional shuffle of a security guard making rounds. Vanessa stood at the top of the stairs, alone, looking out over the quiet town of Faircross. It looked peaceful, almost normal, but nothing about this town would be normal again. She rubbed her jaw lightly, the bruising had begun to fade, but the memory of Clint Mercer's punch was still vivid. Not because of the pain, but because of what it had led to. That moment had changed everything. It had cracked open a shell of silence that had been decades in the making. And once the light got in, the rot didn't stand a chance. She walked down the steps slowly, the sound of her heels echoing in the stillness. At the curb, Eric leaned against the side of the unmarked bureau vehicle, arms crossed, watching her approach. DA's office called, he said. The judge approved another round of arrest warrants. 6 more names. Vanessa gave a tired nod. Anyone we didn't expect? He shrugged. A couple. One admin who funneled records through the sheriff's private server. A patrol captain who signed off on fake community programs. Vanessa didn't respond immediately. She simply opened the car door and slid into the passenger seat. Eric joined her inside, starting the engine, but didn't pull away. He waited, giving her space. After a few long seconds, she asked quietly, "You think they'll rebuild? The department?" She nodded. Eric considered it. Depends. If they clean house for real. If they don't just hire clones of the last batch. Vanessa looked out the window at the precinct building down the street. Yellow crime scene tape still fluttered on the back-loading dock, where a secondary cache of fake documents had been found. A few officers were still inside, packing up files, prepping for the handoff to state authorities. "I never liked the word war form," she said. "Sounds too much like putting makeup on a corpse." Eric smiled faintly. "So what would you call this?" She turned to him. "A reckoning." They drove in silence for a while, passing the diner where Clint had once eaten with half the department every Thursday night like it was tradition. Now it was closed, the windows dark, a hand-written sign taped to the glass, closed until further notice. No one had come to clean the blood off the pavement from the protest that broke out the night before. Just a small crowd, a few shouting matches. One person threw a bottle. No major violence, but it was a sign. The town was shifting under its own weight. Vanessa didn't mind that. Change was supposed to be uncomfortable. They pulled into a bureau field office an hour later, a temporary setup tucked inside a state administrative building that smelled like floor polish and fluorescent lights. Inside, Vanessa was greeted with nods and murmured ma'ams, but nobody tried to make small talk. Word had spread. The agent who got punched by a cop and ended up taking down half a department didn't need to explain herself. In a back office, she sat at a conference table and opened her laptop. A fresh case file waited in her inbox. A different town, a different department, a new list of names. The job never really ended. She stared at the screen for a moment, not clicking it open yet. Instead, she reached for her phone and dialed. Her sister answered on the second ring. "Vanessa?" "Hey," she said, her voice softening. "Just checking in. You okay?" Vanessa smiled slightly. "Getting there. You sound tired." "I am." "Then come home," her sister said. "Even just for a weekend. Mom keeps asking about you." Vanessa didn't answer right away. She could still see the crowd on the courthouse steps, the faces of those who cheered, and the ones who glared. She thought about Marcus Tate, who was now under full witness protection, and Caroline Miles, who had already received veiled threats from anonymous phone calls. She thought about Clint Mercer still sitting in county lockup, still refusing to talk. Soon, she promised. "I'll come soon." After she hung up, she closed her eyes for a moment, just long enough to let her breath settle. She didn't often allow herself stillness, but tonight felt earned. When she opened her eyes again, she clicked open the new case file. Another town, another badge, another uniform hiding something it wasn't supposed to. She started making notes. An hour later, Eric knocked on the door, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. "I heard you weren't sleeping." Vanessa smiled. "I didn't know we were spreading rumors now." He set the coffee down in front of her. "Thought I'd keep you company, or at least caffeinated." She picked up the cup. It was hot and terrible, exactly how she liked it. "You staying in Faircross?" he asked. She shook her head. "I've done what I came to do. The Bureau will monitor the restructuring, but it's up to the state now." "And what about you?" Vanessa looked at the wall, a bulletin board covered in maps, pins, timelines. "I've got places to be," she said. "There's always another Faircross." Eric nodded. "You ever think it'll stop? That we'll fix it all?" She looked at him, eyes steady. "No," she said. "But I think if we keep going, keep shining lights into dark corners, we'll force the monsters to scurry. And maybe we'll save some lives." He didn't argue. As Vanessa packed up her things, she glanced one last time at the precinct on her monitor, now listed as under federal review. Her name would be attached to the file forever. She didn't need medals, didn't care for headlines. But what mattered was that people in Faircross could walk a little taller now, ask a few more questions, expect answers. Outside, the sun was rising. Vanessa stepped into it, the light catching on her badge as she walked away. She hadn't just fought back, she'd won. The story of Vanessa Cole is more than just a criminal investigation. It's a testament to courage, integrity, and the power of standing up when it matters most. For older viewers, many of whom have witnessed decades of social change, this story carries a powerful reminder. Silence can allow injustice to thrive, but sometimes it only takes one person with conviction to bring the truth to light. Life can make us feel like it's too late to make a difference, but this story reminds us that justice has no expiration date. The truth, no matter how long it's been buried, can rise again if even one person has the strength to speak it. Whether you're retired or caring for loved ones, choosing to live with kindness, to stand on the side of what's right, and to encourage the next generation to do the same, that is a legacy worth passing on. It's never too late to do what's right, and sometimes one voice is all it takes. If this story moved you, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more meaningful, emotional, and powerful stories. Thank you for being here with us.